Welcome to Eminazhichiget, a podcast that celebrates Anishinaabek leaders from across the Great Lakes. Eminazhichiget translates as a person who does good things for others, and it's a program of the Michigan-based nonprofit Title Track. Ojawaska Wasimokakwe Indigenous Nemki Indodum Inde Indao. I'm Holly T. Bird, co-executive director of Title Track and host of Eminazhichiget. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eminazhichiget here at Title Track. I'm Holly Bird, and I'm the co-executive director of Title Track. And I'm so excited today to introduce a good friend of mine, Stacey Ettawageshik, a person that I think is just a badass and a super good human, um, who's with us today. And I met Stacey, I don't know, it's got to be 5 or 6 years ago. Um, I think we first met at one of our marches up in probably in Mackinac,
Mhm.
where we were marching against the pipeline. And we were asked to speak together on the issue of MMIW, missing murdered Indigenous women. And Stacey and stood together. Stacey was super nervous to do some public speaking at that time. We were both feeling really emotional. And, I just remembered being really touched by her heartfelt words and her genuine emotion, and being inspired. So, she was a natural when it, came to asking people to be part of this program. So, I'm gonna go ahead without further ado and ask you to introduce yourself, Stacey. Thank you so much for being here, miigwech.
Yeah, miigwech Charlie. So ani boju, giyom kakwe indigenous, pipi guandodam waganasing odalque. So I am Stacey Ettawageshik, and my spirit name is Fisherwoman, and I am from Petoskey, and I am Waganasing Odawa, from the land of the crooked trees. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a mother, I am a sister, I am a daughter, I am an auntie, and I just really enjoy having all those different roles in my life. So
Great. Thank you, miigwech, for being here. And, again, thank you for introducing yourself in your language as well. I think that I try to encourage that whenever possible on this show because um, I think more people need to hear it, and we need to get it into the public sphere of thinking and feeling as much as possible. It is the original language of this place. So,
yeah.
and it's a beautiful language.
Mhm.
Um, so I always like to start right off with, let's dig in here and let's hear a little bit about you. Um, I already know what you do for a living, but I want to ask you, like, what are your passions? What drives you in life?
Sure. So gosh, there's so many things. I think that my main passion is my son Colton. I
Mm.
am a single mom. He is almost 11 years old, which is really just crazy to think about. So, I just feel like ever since he's come into this world that he really drives me to, strive to do the best that I can for him and to show him the love and respect and community and support and show that, you can be educated and you can be doing good things in your own community. So that definitely drives me a lot. He's the light of my life. So another passion of mine is being a humanitarian, and however that means. And mostly I'm a champion for missing and murdered indigenous people and for survivors of violence, and whether that's domestic violence, sexual violence. I'm a survivor myself. Survivors of trafficking, survivors of gender-based violence, but also the violence that was experienced in the boarding school era. So, and some of my ancestors were part of that. My grandfather went to Carlisle boarding school, and you know what he experienced there was atrocious, just as, a lot of Native people experienced. And so that's another one of my passions, I guess I'm trying to say, is that to remember my ancestors and to remember like where I came from. And not just from my Native American side, but from my mother's side as well. Germany, Ireland, what they also went through. Um, so And yeah, just to kind of, even if you make a small change, I think it really has a ripple effect. And whether that's just being kind to someone or doing the work that I do right now, as far as, just awareness about boarding schools, about gender based violence, about how that affects tribal communities, especially in Michigan. What are those barriers and challenges that we're facing? And how can we provide more education and awareness and collaborate and support, like working with the state government, working with the federal government, working with other agencies throughout the state to support this movement.
Fantastic. Thank you for your work. And just to touch on a few of the things that you mentioned, what is the organization that you work with?
So it's United Through Fires Against Violence. We're the tribal coalition in Michigan for domestic and sexual violence.
Great. And give us some statistics about gender-based violence that you deal with
Sure.
your work.
Sure. So really, it's 1 in 3 Native American women will be victimized in their lifetime. So really, it's not a matter of if; it's a matter of when. And there are definitely multiple victimizations that go on there, whether it's domestic violence, sexual violence, stalking, trafficking, murder. You know, it's just so prevalent in our communities, and, because of so many things that go back to history, go back to, jurisdiction issues, um, and, I think it's 80, maybe 85% of the perpetrators of this violence are, non-native. So coming from outside of the community, they are victimizing our indigenous people. And, women are victimized at a higher rate. And then indigenous women are victimized at an even higher rate. I think it's 2.5 times more likely than the general population. Um, our rural communities, the lack of visibility, just the hypersexualization of Native women that have gone on for, so long. So yeah.
So, in full disclosure, you and I work on this stuff together. I'm an attorney who represents victims of crime in the tribal communities, and your organization works on that training and advocacy piece of it. Um, and boy, this is something that touches us both, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it true? I mean, I think that, like, when I think about all the advocates that we have and the attorneys that we have working on this, all the people that are actually doing this work, the majority of us are women. I mean,
Mm.
on our calls that we have, how many people usually join us from the
From our advocate calls, sure. So, gosh, like 20 some.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's all women.
All women.
And
Typically, you'll see that.
yeah, and I always say too, I think the majority of them have experience with this personally, which is just what in part of that is what drives them to this work. Full disclosure, my for me, it was something that I saw at a very young age. My mother was um beaten, subject to domestic violence, severe domestic violence. I grew up um remembering that me and my brothers would hide in our bedrooms at night and do whatever we could to drown out the noise, right? I remembered just things being used, screwdrivers to at my mom's throat, pieces of glass, um the sounds of screams, the sounds of beating. And I used to literally rock on my hands and knees in my bed and hit my head against the wall like this, and to drown out the noise. And I had a bump on my head till I was like 7.
Mm.
Not like I had a concussion, but it was almost like just a defensive, I don't know, bump that my head developed. And and my mom wore these huge scars on her arms for years after being pushed through a glass door. And, those are so growing up that, I understand walking around as a kid with PTSD and not knowing how the rest of the world operated quite. And then even the patterns in my own life when I started to develop relationships with men and other people, that kind of echoed some of that. Like, I remember some of my first relationships were probably a little bit abusive. Maybe not quite as physically abusive, but, um, you know, there was a point where I had to say to myself, and I think I was lucky enough to have a really, really resilient parent and who met my stepfather, who's a wonderful person, very strong person, and we all got into therapy, which is a privilege, right? And to, so I was able to say, "Oh, no, I have to stop this now." Right? And even to this day, I'll recognize patterns that sometimes pop up, or someone I'm with that where I'll go, "Oh my god, that person so reminds me of my dad." Right? Or some aspect of that, when he was in that state that, and I'll just go, "Oh my gosh." It's striking. And I don't think it's not something that, for us as women or as Indigenous people, it doesn't mean it hasn't happened to other people. Because I know as an attorney, and I've represented abused and neglected kids for years, and I've represented women, parents in these situations. And, so it's not, just us as Indigenous people that violence is a symptom of a larger problem. But for us, it's just magnified by the fact that we have so much trauma in our communities. For you and in your own experiences, well, for me, I'm gonna say all of my experiences are kind of what led me into some of this work in the first place, even becoming an attorney.
Mhm.
Um, and in fact, I was a counselor for Counsel Against Domestic Assault when I was in college. And so it was like
Yeah.
grappling with maybe trying to control the narrative for myself a little bit after seeing something and I couldn't do anything about it at that age.
Mhm.
So it's amazing, um, somehow those things that impact us and we take them and how they mold us. Is that true for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experience, Holly. It's definitely it's a part of a lot of our lives, and that's really what led me to this work is being a survivor myself of many different types of violence, from domestic violence to sexual assault to stalking. Um, and from an early age, I think um, probably preteen years, I kind of just learned that to embrace I don't know how to say this, but, I would be called Pocahontas a lot. I would be called, that kind of thing. So, like, I just thought, okay, if I play that role, then I'll be accepted kind of thing. Because if I tried to be anything else, then I didn't fit in that way. But if I tried to be like that, then I didn't fit in that way. You know what I mean? So, like, just as a teen, you just want to fit in, right? You just want to fit in with your peers. So, anyways, saying all that, I tried to kind of fill that role, and like I was saying, being hypersexualized as a Native woman. Oh, it's exotic. It's, just picturing Pocahontas in the Disney movie, and how she was portrayed and romanticized, So anyways, so I had many relationships that were actually, I think, to be honest with you, Holly, every relationship I've had has pretty much been abusive. Whether it's physical, emotional, just layers and layers of trauma.
Mhm,
And so that absolutely led me to this. I actually had always been like a natural helper as well. So, like in my friend group, I would be the one people would go to and like console and listen, kind
mhm,
of thing. And then I always kind of knew I wanted to be a therapist, a counselor, something along those lines. And so when I went to, college, social work psychology was my major. And, anyways, and then I got an internship at the Women's Resource Center in Northern Michigan here in Petoskey. And
mhm,
at that point, I hadn't really identified myself as being a survivor of that type of violence until I really started to dig into it and
mhm,
become more educated and aware of what that really looks like. And so being in that internship so early, realizing that I was a survivor, I was being triggered over and over and over again. But also I feel like that helped in my healing process too.
mhm,
I think once you can like identify where this is coming from, some coping mechanisms, that kind of thing, definitely helps with the healing process. I will say I'm still in that process. I
Mhm,
think I think every day is a chance to heal maybe another part of yourself, or whether it's something small that you do, and just really, um, care for yourself and know that you are worth more and know that you deserve that respect, and you don't have to be that hypersexualized person that, you know, that's out there in the media. So, so yeah, definitely brought me to this work, and just I think it just filled me up more to be like, I can actually, take my experiences and help other women, other children, other people through what they were going through, because I knew what it was like to kind of be in that really crisis state, and just be in that fight or flight mode, and being able to be there for someone. So I was an advocate for 11 years. And that experience just really, is inspiring, and, seeing how survivors survive day to day, with what they're experiencing, they still push forward.
mhm.
And, it's amazing. So that also drives my passion for sure.
Yeah, I always say those experiences, what I see from our people in particular, but people who do this work is, yes, we've had that experience, and yes, we have our own traumas from it, and yet we've developed this enormous sense of justice and compassion. I can see us both right here talking, like, as I was telling my story, I was thinking, "Oh my god, what if my dad watches this?" Or what if one of my family members watches this? Because my mother never liked to talk about it.
Yeah,
She's gone now, but, like, I know I'm gonna hear from my sisters who if they watch this video, and I'm just gonna be like, It's a story, right? It's our
it's your
truth
life story. Yeah, it's your
that I
truth.
lived through." And,
Mhm.
I can see you too as we're talking about it, I feel we're both, like, a little tiny bit triggered, and
Definitely.
yeah, and I'm feeling it, and I'm seeing it, and I'm like, automatically, I just wanna punch anybody that's around Stacey that might be abusive, it's like my whole, like, uh, you know, it is 'cause I understand, but
Yeah,
I
and even after years of therapy, um, whatever modality you're doing, I
Right.
haven't tried EMDR, but I have heard really good things about that for PTSD.
I've heard
I
that too,
mhm,
yeah. Never tried
yeah,
it.
so
I always feel like work is my therapy. Doing the helper work seems to be our therapy, but it's true as people who are compassionate and giving and trying and helpers, because it's so funny that you said that, because that's what I call myself all the time. Even, like, if I go to lodge and I say, "The reason I'm here is to help,"
mhm, mhm,
right? And so, um, boy,
yeah.
I wonder how many more of our women would say that.
I feel like it's a lot, I feel like we take on a lot of that and just kind of have that natural feeling to step into that role,
Mhm.
as women and as mothers, as aunties, as, sisters, and to care for our loved ones, to care for our community.
And maybe it's one of those situations to some degree where we try so hard to help others because somebody didn't help us,
That's right.
or
That's
somebody
absolutely
did,
it. It's
or maybe there have been times when we haven't been able to help ourselves.
Yeah, I think you're dead on that one. 'Cause you know what it's like to feel like when you desperately want someone to be there for you and maybe don't reach out, but then you can kind of pick up on where people are at, like, if they're struggling, and you're like, "Okay, well, I'm here to listen. I'm always here to support you," you know? Yeah.
I hear you being so brave right now, and I do, and I'm thankful for you. The
Yes, you as well. You definitely have inspired me a lot ever since I have met you, and, we did that speech, and I just broke down. Holly, I remember looking at that crowd of people and just seeing the pain.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know if you're an empath or, I'm sure you are, because I feel like a lot of us are, in this role too, and I could literally feel all of the emotion in my chest.
Yeah.
And I couldn't hold it in anymore. And so I broke down, but at the same time, I'm like, gosh, Stacey, why would you do that? But that's just being real. Like, this is the reality of it. It's hurting our people. We were right at the spot where like they had their setup for the pipeline, and just looking at all those people and knowing what our communities have been through. And it just kind of all bubbled to the surface for me. So
But I think that's important. I think it's important for people to see that because when we talk about this, when we show people our hearts and our
yeah.
vulnerability, that we as really I mean, I'm certain that people in your community, I know I do, but, like, other people in your community see Stacy and they're like, "Oh, she's that one, she's a strong one, look at her. Look at all that she's gone through," and yet they don't often see that because we're so proud and we're always, as part of our survival mechanism, we try to shut that off and show
Hmm.
people the face that they need to see at that moment or we need them to see so we can just take the next step, right? Whether it's for us or for our kids.
Yep.
We're not allowed to cry in front of our kids, right? Because we're trying to be brave all the time and we're trying to show them that everything's okay. But sometimes it's not, and so I think it's okay for us to show people those tears. Tears are freeing. Tears are releasing. We
Hmm.
shouldn't be carrying around all that stress.
Yeah.
Really bad for our bodies. But also, it's sort of like the people that I deal with in this organization who are musicians, and actors or artists. And I always say that part of what you do is to help heal others by playing music and helping people feel.
Mm.
People sometimes don't know what they're feeling. Sometimes they don't know how to express it in a good way. Sometimes they don't know how to name it, but if they see someone else do it, then they're like, that's what that is. Or, oh, that's okay for me to do that. And that's so healing. And I've had that conversation with like umpteen musicians and umpteen people doing our work, like, hey, you don't realize how healing you are.
That's right.
You're putting that out there and you're being real and you're living your heart's work, right? And so,
Mhm.
people should see that. It isn't something that shouldn't make us cry. Whenever any of the women who are in our community get assaulted or are treated badly, we should be crying because
Mhm.
those are our life givers, you know? And
Mhm.
it's a direct impact on our children too. So, I always
Mm.
say that, everybody is somebody's relative. All of us are somebody's daughter or somebody's auntie or somebody's granddaughter or mother.
Mhm.
So, people should see that and be insulted by it, right? And stand up
Absolutely.
against it.
That's right. Right, act as if that was your child, that was your sister, that was your aunt. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought it was powerful in any case, and I still do. And I know one thing as the mother of a daughter, that's something I'm always worried about.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I constantly worry about that with her.
Mhm.
And she knows it. I would say you have to be careful wherever you go. She's got long hair, long dark hair, and even though she's also European, people know, you look at her and most people go, "Oh, yeah, she looks native or at least part native."
Mhm.
And um they're not calling her Pocahontas, thank God, like they did with me too. I got all of them,
Yeah.
Pocahontas and Wetback because 'cause I'm also Mexican.
I
And
was gonna say, what's the other one? Squaw.
so
That's
yeah.
spear chucker.
Oh, yeah. I got all of that. Um, and I always say it's funny too because I'm pretty latte, I carry a little more privilege in this walk than other people, some of my other relatives who are darker. But yeah, I tell her all the time, like, not to scare her, but just to be cautious about where you're at
Yep.
and what you're doing because you are a target. So she went to my daughter got to go to Europe this summer with her
Nice.
cousin and my dad. So it was her grandfather. And they just went to London and they had a really good time and I took her cousin aside and I just said, "Grandpa is gonna be great at this, but, like, I really want you to be aware of these risks, which are gonna be different for her than for you." And she hadn't really thought about it, she was, her cousin is this beautiful, tall, blonde, very, Nordic looking, you know, beautiful girl. So she had her own I'm sure she would have her own admirers, but, like, she had just never really thought about that for Annabella. And, it gave her a moment, but I
Mhm.
said, "These are the statistics,
That's right.
and it doesn't matter, you know, where we come from. It does matter in that there are some places that are more prone to it." And so, like, in your experience, where do we see this happening more often than not? Where are there areas in, um, indigenous country here, indigenous community where more people are being victimized than in other places?
Yeah, I think, reservations, I think it's happening there more often than not by non-native people. Um, and, but from within the community as well. Um, I think it's, so I'm part of Little Traverse Bay Bands, and, our reservations are housing basically, and it's very checkerboard, which a lot of tribes in Michigan are, but it's rural, it's isolated. Maybe police aren't responding as quickly as they could because of the rural area. So I think it's happening there. And also just yeah, in those really isolated pockets of Michigan, which pretty much northern and upper peninsula is all rural area. But thinking about the UP as well,
Mhm.
um, absolutely. And then, Alaska, the time it takes to respond to a domestic violence. I mean, the only way of transportation could be just snowmobile, could be a boat, a plane, so definitely happening there more. And um yeah, and same goes for the reservations out west that are just thousands of miles and don't have, as many resources, I guess you could say. And not that a lot of survivors are reporting the violence because the lack of resources, because the lack that they're not going to be believed, because their partner, they're so fearful of their partner, all those factors that play into why a survivor isn't reporting, or wouldn't report, or that, um and the offender definitely knows, like, those barriers that go on, and of course, that power and control dynamic, the focus really should be on that offender and that perpetrator of, like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Not on the survivor and why they aren't reporting, but why is that offender keep, assaulting their partner, keep doing this to them, so
'Cause they can.
because they can, because they get away with it, because the lack
Mhm.
of accountability, the jurisdiction, all those things, and that's the paradigm shift definitely that needs to happen is focus on the offender, the perpetrator, their behavior, not their survivor. We're trying to keep the survivor and their family safe,
Mhm.
so
And we need to be talking about it. It
yeah.
needs to be loud and clear. It's interesting that you brought that up about out west too. One thing that we're both very aware of is the effect of extractive industries
Oh, yes, absolutely.
on both missing, murdered Indigenous people and violence. Um, One of the best examples is like Fort Berthold, and the oil pipelines coming through there, how with those man camps, um, crime rate went up something like 75%. And those jurisdictions, both the tribes and the counties, did not have the law enforcement available, like the numbers available to even keep up with it. So people were have been disappearing, women and children, have been disappearing or have suffered through violence or some of the other things. And um I feel like we haven't seen even the tip of that problem yet. And interestingly, I get a lot of people who come um, through my office as victims who are here from other states, sort of in shelters. having been trafficked, having been victimized, um, out in the Dakotas or out in Montana. And some of the stories they tell are, we have a hard time because we're like, we can't tell if there's like if this is true sometimes, or if there's mental health issues going on, or both, right? Is it something that happened as a result of the victimization? And in all cases, I feel like they are victims. Like there's something there. I keep hearing the same stories. So um it's a sizable problem, and one that I know we're worried about coming here to Michigan because of the tunnel that's being built and the proposed man camps up in Kinross.
Yep. Yeah, there's already, I mean, what is it, 400 workers there, I think?
Mm,
And actually, in Sault Ste. Marie, a lot of those workers are taking up space, right? I mean, you have an increase of a population in already rural town. And they're taking up the hotel and motel rooms and they're going to the businesses. And who are they? I mean, men. It's men, they're out of their own community coming into a place where they're already disrespecting the land. So
mhm.
why wouldn't they disrespect, the people? And, so definitely gotta keep a close watch on that.
Yeah, that extraction industry that, we call the raping of Mother Earth,
Yep.
title track, we're firmly against it. One of our missions is clean water. And so, we're always working on that problem as well. But there's such a correlation. And it's interesting because this company, Enbridge, who is, you know, setting up those man camps, has admitted because they've had other people who have been found guilty in trafficking in,
Mhm.
Wisconsin and Minnesota,
Yep.
um, have admitted that the people that they hire are usually people that can't get work in other places. So felons, people that have backgrounds that don't allow them to work well in other places. And so this is who we're allowing into our communities. And, um, you know, our organizations have been working on this and voicing our concern. And what have we heard from law enforcement?
You know, um, yeah,
Cricket,
minimal. I mean, I
cricket.
think I think that if you were to ask them, "Oh, yeah, we see that as an issue."
Mhm.
Um, I think, but at the same time, is it really a priority or yeah.
Right. And we're already seeing problems in Michigan where jurisdiction is thrown up. The problems with jurisdiction, whose problem is it and who's going to throw money at it, is always thrown up as an excuse to why there's inaction in the cases that we have already, right? And it's been so frustrating
Mhm.
doing some of this work for that reason. The patchwork nature of enforcement throughout Michigan. I always like to use ICWA as an example for this, here in Michigan, because we do have such a wide land base area and we have almost different cultures in different parts of the state. Um, in ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is a federal law, which means all states are subject to it, wasn't always being enforced, or followed in all counties in Michigan for years and years and years. And there were even judges who, I'm a tribal judge, and generally have respect for my colleagues, but there were judges who are learned people, educated lawyers and attorneys who were like, "Oh no, that doesn't apply to us." And I'd be like, "Oh, does OSHA apply to you?" Do these other federal acts not apply to you? But for some reason, that was one that people would get stuck on. So we had to create a Michigan version of ICWA called the Michigan Family Preservation Act in order to enforce ICWA-like provisions. And and to me, that took years. It took 10 years or more to get that work done. And in the meantime, how many cases, went without those protections? And those children, where did they go, right? And so that's the kind of stuff we're seeing also in these victimization cases, and with our enforcement of PPOs and things like that.
Yeah.
Uh, so when we talk about that stuff, um, what when we talk about that work, like, who in this work and who in the work that you do inspires you?
Sure. So you are definitely one of them.
Oh, thank you.
Um, yeah, absolutely.
I feel
And
really humbled by that.
absolutely. And Lori Jump, I think is a huge one as well because she's the one that actually started Uniting Three Fires Against Violence, and I want to say it was 2009.
Mhm,
And she continues to do just amazing work, strives to be, the best advocate for this movement and in any way she can support and move things forward. She's currently at Strong Hearts Native Helpline, which is that Native helpline, the first Native helpline for survivors of DV,
mhm.
specifically. So, and also Sandra Pilgrim Lewis, my coworker, she has I remember just being an advocate, a very, like, early, young advocate,
Mhm.
and, the way she would talk and, like, she will tell you what's up, but in her way as respectful and, like, just no miss way. You
Yeah, that
just
gentle way she has.
yes.
And
Yep.
I love her for her intersectionality as well
Yes.
because she's Black, she's Lakota, right? Oglala?
Yeah.
And but she lives here,
Mhm.
and she's had all of these experiences as a as an advocate, as a mother, as a woman, and she just brings it all to the table, and it really, it allows us to expand this work in such a beautiful and inclusive way.
Absolutely, and she's one to share her survivor stories,
Mhm.
like she has been through so much and she is an amazing woman, advocate. She's just an inspiration. Absolutely. She's always supported me, going forward and she's a storyteller. So, you listen to her stories and you really like think and like take those lessons to heart for sure. So, also Rachel Carr, she was the previous executive director of Uniting Three Fires, did an amazing job, expanded the capacity of Uniting Three Fires and really like strives to make those connections and networking within Michigan and nationally as well. Um, and now she's at a Strong Hearts Native Helpline doing the good work still.
I think
And
those strong hearts snatched her up, but you know what?
yeah,
Then we wouldn't have you here.
yeah, she really encouraged me to, apply for this position and, I was on the board of directors for 11 years as well for
Mhm.
Uniting Three Fires and just always been supportive and wanting to, put Uniting Three Fires out there, that, just recognize the good work that they do. And, we serve all 12 tribes in Michigan. We don't serve just one, and, we provide the technical assistance and support and training and whatever those programs need. Other departments, we definitely strive to try to fill those gaps.
That's wonderful. And it's not just tribal people either, it can be descendants, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. It's anyone, any organization really that wants to, collaborate, network, support,
Mhm.
whatever we can do. There's a lot of stuff about gun violence prevention right now going on. So making those kind of connections and you know,
And one thing I love about, your organization is that, it's an Anishinaabek focused and supported group. However, the reach is broader than that, and that's something I'm seeing more often now um, in our support agencies for victims of domestic violence. They're saying, everybody. Like some people are saying everybody, you don't even have to be indigenous, and that's wonderful if they can get the funding to help them with that. But for people like me where my people are from the Southwest and we're transplants up here, but we're part of this community, I would feel comfortable, reaching out to Three Fires because I know that that's the passion is helping all indigenous people. Sometimes I feel like our indigenous people from the South, Mexico, and even south of that don't consider themselves to be part of this, and yet they so much are, right? And like Uniting Three Fires is there for those organizations, even if they don't know that, right?
Absolutely. And, Canadians as well, First Nations people, Aboriginal people,
That's right.
we're all indigenous and we're, united. And so uniting three fires against violence is the three fires, the Chippewa, Odawa, and what am I? Oh, Potawatomi.
Yep.
So that's uniting the three fires of Michigan, and we all have, our different roles. Um, and just really having a united front, I think, is so important too.
Yeah. So, what do you want to inspire in others, and in particular, our Anishinaabeg community?
Sure. So inspiring others to, just be your authentic self. Embrace that, embrace your culture. I think culture can be prevention, culture can be healing. And listening to elders, elder stories. We're losing a lot of our elders, and maybe some of those traditions, we can learn a lot from our elders. And so a lot of them are oral traditions, right?
Mhm.
Oral history. So, um, and also just supporting your community in whatever way that means. Is it, helping with a feast or helping with a whatever event or ceremony or what's going on? Maybe some could be apprehensive to want to or to feel comfortable, like, going to a ceremony or some other tradition, but you gotta start somewhere, and I think, being supportive, in that way, like, welcoming, very
Mhm.
welcoming and kind, and, like, we all have to start somewhere and, have good intentions and, um, you know, and also, yeah, just living by those 7 grandfather teachings. I definitely think about those every day.
Mhm.
How can I be respectful and loving and truthful and honest with, not with just myself, my family, but with everyone, the community, the work I do, everyone I talk to, how can I show those? It's one thing to kind of like know what those teachings are, but it's another to really embrace them in your value system.
Yeah, live into them and put them into action.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And then, for, we have Indigenous Peoples Day is coming up, and Title Track loves to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day as much as we can. It feels like everybody's in like a rush right now. School started, we've got elections coming up, everybody's sort of in a flurry. And, but this is a moment that we get to, for at least a day. And I always like to say Indigenous Peoples Day is every day because we live here.
That's
But
right.
just for that one day, we get to breathe finally live in that idea that, hey, maybe we are getting some recognition. Maybe we are finally being celebrated, by everybody for the beautiful and inspiring people we are. What do you want to say about Indigenous Peoples Day?
Sure. So yes, I'm so thankful that it's Indigenous Peoples Day and not, the other one, Columbus Day, because he was a murderer. We all know this now. Although some places I feel like still recognize it as Columbus Day. Like, come on. Um, I remember I went to Grand Valley State University and I was in the Native American Student Association and we did a play called Rethinking Columbus. And anyways, I just whenever I think about Columbus Day, I think about what we did there, and just obviously in that play, we showed how Columbus was, how
Mhm.
he was trying to commit genocide, how disrespectful, and how he abused, the women there. Anyways, so so it's like just all the strengths and resilience that indigenous people have gone through, our ancestors. Like, we wouldn't be here without our ancestors, surviving and thriving and, keeping that and thinking about the 7 generations behind us as well as the 7 generations ahead of us. And knowing just as a people that we're so strong and resilient, and that our history is being more recognized. And um yeah, so it's definitely empowering.
Yeah, I always like to remind people, because we are recovering from erasure, we are recovering from genocide. Um, we're still working on being heard. And so it does feel good to say, finally to hear people say, okay, we're going to get rid of this genocidal maniac as a celebration. And we can do away with Thanksgiving too, for that matter. And just call it, Truthsgiving or harvest. Why don't we call it something different, right?
There you
But,
go.
um, coming to those truths that help us to progress together and, have that reconciliation and healing that needs to happen. And this is just a small step, right? We know it's still coming around. There's still communities that don't know that they should be doing this yet or don't understand. It's not a slam on Italians. We love Italians. It's more about true history and what's right and what's just. And I always tell people because I'm on the school board, and I always like to say, people remember that our history as Indigenous people, like U.S. history, is like this big. It's 500 years. Indigenous history is like this. And so, if you don't
Center.
know any of that and you don't understand uh, what Indigenous people have done for this country, the fact that we had villages, that we had whole cities here, that we had governments and, this beautiful, rich culture of life um, before the US was established. And then you don't really know the real history of where you live. You really, all anybody is learning here is European history. That's what they call world history, but they're learning European history and Europeans' establishment here.
Yeah.
That's it, right? And so I'm just like, that just doesn't, that's
I
not really
do
an education.
Right, I do see at least here, my son, I feel like the tribe here, and I think in other communities in Michigan too, and other tribal communities, they're providing a lot of that history to schools so they
Mhm,
can incorporate it in a culturally honoring, respectful way. Now, I
yeah,
will say in kindergarten, there was something that came home with my son that didn't portray it accurately, and I definitely spoke up and said something because, like, he's a descendant, you
mm,
know, and so anyways, but I feel like schools are definitely doing a little, better job at it nowadays, so
yeah. Yeah, and we
and
have
it
to do that. It feels like as parents, we have to do that all the time,
yeah,
right?
yep,
'Cause even now in 2024, people don't have accurate history, and we can't always blame them because they didn't get taught that. But
right,
we have opportunities. Now we have a whole state approved social studies that was written by Anishinaabek people that's accurate, and this is one thing that I'm working on here. I'm like, we need to implement this. It's free. There's no excuse not to implement it, and it's a good thing.
absolutely, absolutely it is, and also show that piece of, yes, this is our history, but also you gotta show, like, the present day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like a lot of people think, "Oh, well, that was just in the past. Oh, those people existed 100 years ago, 200 years." No, y'all. We still here. We
We're
still
here.
here.
And yes, we eat spaghetti, and yes, we have
Yes,
internet.
we don't live in teepees and wigwams and, like, you know?
I remember when my son was in kindergarten, he had a friend that came up to him and he told him, he told him he was Native American, and, I don't even like to say that anymore. We'll just say indigenous now because Native American assumes that we're native to America, which is not our word. It's not
Right.
it's not what we called it. But anyway, uh, and he said he couldn't be Native American because he didn't have arrows and buckskin on.
Yep.
And I just laughed. I'm like, "Well, how about if we show up one day with some regalia on, we'll just freak the poor kid out." But anyway, but it is those examples, and, we know that we've seen it. I used to do a fair amount of education. I still do a fair amount of education, but I worked for the Nokomis Learning Center in
Mm,
Nokomis, and we had this whole module where we'd bring in, like, a group of kids and adults too, and we do a lot of myth busting, and the questions that we got, were Do you eat spaghetti? Um, do you drive cars? Like, what do you guys do? Sort of stuff. And I'd just be like, well, I'm a college student. And yes, I drive whatever it was I was driving then. And the interesting thing is that, I kind of expected that back at that time. That was in the 90s. Well, when we had, do you remember when the boats came up here? The the replicas of the Mayflower,
Ah, yes.
and they came to the bay. And I was part of a group that approached them, and we chose to sit down and educate on it because it was a little traumatizing for people to see those.
Yeah.
And so I was part of a group that sat down to educate the people on the boat. And most of them were college students, and then there was a couple of adults. And we opened it up for questions. And I kid you not, we got some of the same questions that I did back in the 90s.
Mhm.
But they were just updated, like, "Do you have internet? You you have rap music?" I mean, it was like I was like, "Oh, wow, okay." And, of course, I always say no question is a stupid question, but it just showed me how far we still needed to go, and that's probably why people are having a difficult time in some places understanding why Columbus Day should go away,
Sure.
and, why we should celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. But, um, hopefully by things like this where we spotlight wonderful people who are doing great work, this will be part of that,
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Another
educate.
person I was thinking about is my Uncle Frank, too. He's just he he just keeps going, he does the international stuff, he does all kinds of things. He's just such a wealth of knowledge, and I could literally sit there all day and just listen to him talk and learn so much. And, I really need to, I felt like definitely the past couple years, I'm like, okay, I really need to learn as much as I can from him, how to
Mhm.
do ceremony, how to do this and that, and take those family stories, like our family stories. Like he was telling one about, I think it's the first ancestor we can track to was Red Butterfly and how we got that name. And so just really, embracing that and knowing like in my family and to carry on those stories and those traditions. So and he's always inspiring. And also my Aunt Rochelle, I think
Yeah.
just I learned so much from her as well and my parents. You know, and, learning their stories, our family stories, how to do ghost supper, season is coming up and, I gotta be able to know how to cook all that stuff, the meatballs and just just
Sweet meat.
the soups,
Of
and
all of it.
I'm excited for that. I always just love this time of year, so we honor
I
our ancestors all the time, but also, we put those, grave crowns on and cook our ghost supper feast to honor them, so.
Yeah, I love it too. I love that we get to celebrate that, and in in my father's way, the ofrendas that we do, we kinda do both, and it's like we just make that whole October, November is ours. But
Right.
there's one thing I'm so glad you brought your relatives up. Of course, I adore your uncle and your aunt. Um, and one of the teachings that I've shared many times have attributed to your Uncle Frank was that teaching that, and I think this goes perfectly with Indigenous Peoples Day, that idea that we are somebody's seventh generation, that we are somebody's hopes and dreams for the future. And we're that embodiment. And um no matter where you're from, that's true, right? No
Mhm.
matter where you're from. And That that when I see, like, the northern lights or we're sitting around the fire and we know where our connections are to our ancestors, I always say to them, "I hope that we're living up to that hope that you had," you know?
Absolutely. I never met my grandfather, Fred Ettawageshik, but and not to be all, but this is part of our culture too, is that I feel him. I really do. Like I feel like I've seen him before. I feel like a strong connection to him. I've definitely seen him in other ways and felt him. And I just have that feeling within me that I know that he's proud and just what he went through in the boarding school and, seeing where his family is now carrying on these traditions, you know, just
Mhm.
makes my heart full. So we are our ancestors' dream.
We are.
Yeah.
Are. And I'm certain that he's proud of you. I would be if I was your ancestor.
Yeah. So me watch. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm proud of you now.
Thank you. Wow, just so proud of you and the work that you do. I'm so glad that we can, have this connection and, whether it's fighting, against the pipelines and for women and domestic violence survivors, it's always nice to have those strong connections within this work. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And thank you for uplifting that too, because I always feel like, um, we do this work because we are inspired by the people in front of us, and we're inspired by our future generations, by our children, and, the kind of world we want them to be living in.
Hmm.
But we are still, like, one of those first generations that's really surviving, right? Like, our some of our grandparents were in those tiny tar tar paper shacks, right? Or, moving from place to place or whatever it was. As you said, your grandfather was in boarding school. I know my husband's father was, up at Harbor Springs in boarding school. I come from a family where, my parents missed or my father and his siblings missed boarding school because they would hide, and so they would, they were really good at hiding for some reason, and when they couldn't hide, I noticed there was a pattern that when those census people came to the door, if they saw the kids, the family would suddenly pick up and move to Chicago for a while.
Mm,
I
wow.
never got to talk to them about, grandparents about what that was, but, I think there was a lot of fear there. And so we're of a generation where, yes, we still have things going on, we're still surviving, but right now, we're not worried about boarding schools, right? We've overcome that part of it even though they closed 25 years ago or 30 years ago. And we're still overcoming that trauma in our communities. And we have other things to worry about, but we're fortunate to be here, and live in warm houses. And even though we struggle and we struggle more than the average person does, we struggle a lot.
Yeah,
And so many of our people are still in survival mode, meaning paycheck to paycheck or worse. Um,
absolutely.
but we
Yeah.
are still those hopes and dreams. And so, yeah, we just
The
hope.
fact that we can talk about it right now and not have, you know, huge consequences, right? Like
Right.
from Yeah.
Yeah.
Being able to practice our own traditions and culture where it was persecuted before, so
Yeah. It is. It's a good time, and we still have a lot of work to do.
that's right, but
We
we're
still have
doing
a lot to
it.
do, and we're doing it. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. I want to give a shout out to your organization because you guys do such important work in our community. You have a name that's visible. Everybody knows about Uniting Three Fires Against Violence that's doing this work. And it is really important because, aside from tribal agencies that provide services to tribal members, which are, few and far between, and sometimes they don't even have laws that'll back them up or maybe not funding. You're an organization that's very specific to providing services that are culturally appropriate and, for Indigenous people. And as the largest number, statistically and by percentage of people that experience violence, that's a huge, responsibility and a huge, um, undertaking, and it's a lot of work. So I know that the people that you work with, um, have to deal with people's daily problems. You have to deal with, people who don't know what they're doing or doing it appropriately sometimes, uh,
Mhm.
and sometimes with that secondary trauma that goes along with doing this work, having to experience those stories and all of that. But still, we persist, and still you persist, and the work is so important. So, what is one way, that people out there in the ether, in our community, um, can help your organization.
Yeah, I think, the more education and awareness is great. If people can visit our website, utfav.org, or spell it out, UnitedFiresAgainstViolence.org. We have cultural videos on there, speaking anywhere from food sovereignty to victim advocacy. Those are a great way to understand this work, understand why we do what we do, hearing from different community members, from elders to advocates. And we also have other resources on there about MMIW. There's our MMIP toolkit. You can access different tribes' websites on there, their services, their contact information. We do have an option to donate on our website. We utilize that for things like food and other events that we can do that maybe the grants that we have don't necessarily pay for. So any of that is extremely helpful, and just, um, having any Indigenous voice, or really, any organization kind of in this work needs that Indigenous voice, to lift up Indigenous survivors and the barriers and the challenges that occur. So,
Great. Thank you so much.
yeah.
And keep doing what you do, miigwech, for all your
Yes.
work and for being part of Amidichichiget.
Yeah. Chimigwech.
Miigwech. Mama P.
Yep. I'm a P.